We are very excited to welcome you today to our Reclaiming the Promise of Public Education conversation series presented by the Albert Shanker Institute jointly with the American Federation of Teachers. We call it Reclaiming the Promise advisedly because we firmly believe that we need to reclaim the promise of public education, not as it is today or as it was in some utopian past, but as we imagine it for all children, and that we have to fulfill our collective obligation to help all children succeed. Reclaiming the promise for public education has a small number of really critical features, but one of them is one of the things we're here to talk about today. And that is an engaging curriculum that goes beyond standardized tested subjects, if you will, that prepares all students for life and for citizenship. This series was launched, this conversation series, last month with a session on the use and misuse of value-added measures, an important, timely, and controversial topic, and a terrific conversation. Our purpose today and our conversation today is about the civic purposes of education and the Common Core. It is being live streamed on the Albert Shanker Institute website and will also be available in other forms through the Shanker Institute and AFT after today. As you can see, for those that know our panelists, and as you will hear in a minute when I introduce them, we have a really informed and passionate panel to address some of the key questions that we face on the topic of civic purposes of education. In a moment, I'll introduce those questions and panelists, but first let me tell you a little bit about the format. We are going to ask each panelist to begin with 10 minutes of opening remarks. I will only provide time cues if needed, a sort of 1-minute warning that I'll try to delicately do by holding up a finger or a piece of paper. Then we're going to turn to some questions from me, from the audience, and from the panelists for each other. We're going to then, as we draw toward the close, we'll bring it all together and brief 2-minute closing statements at the end of the conversation. Our aim in the Reclaiming the Promise conversation series is to have a real airing of informed views on topics that matter and a real discussion. So if you think about the flavor is not an afternoon with the World Wrestling Federation or an evening with CNN. The flavor is more Thanksgiving dinner with your super smart extended family, some of whom you disagree with, more so after the wine and the tryptophan. There's only water being served here, I will point out. We've asked our panelists to address some key questions on this topic in their opening statements. Some of those are, how well has the Common Core, or is the Common Core, addressing the civic purposes of education? Or put another way, will the intellectual challenges of the English language arts and math standards fully groom students for the deliberative work of citizenship? Another question, why did we leave civics to last in this country? And why are we approaching them in a very different way? The College, Career, and Civic Life, or C3 framework, is just that. It's a framework for social studies. It's not a set of standards. How do they relate to the CCSS implementation that's currently underway with all its promise and problem? And how do they relate to the next generation science standards, which are in the examination and adoption phase right now? But most important of all, I think, is the question of what must be done to fully bring the civic purposes of education into 20th century American public education. So, we're going to ask our panelists to address those questions and, of course, to share the related good work and important work that their organizations are doing. And given that we have terrific scholars, debaters, and advocates up here, they will no doubt address questions that I did not ask, but they think I should have. You can count on that. I'm going to introduce them in the order in which we will ask them to speak. And I'm going to start to my immediate left with Mira Levinson. Mira is an associate professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She is a political philosopher who writes about civic education, multiculturalism, educational justice, among other things. She also was a teacher for 8 years in the Atlanta and Boston public schools, has published a number of books, the most recent of which is a co-edited volume on Making Civics Count, which came out last year from the Harvard Educational Press. Mira is a national leader in civic education and has been honored with grants and fellowships from the Spencer Foundation, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and a number of others. And I should say that you can read, I believe in your packets you have presenter bios, and there is much more than I will share on their terrific backgrounds. I want to say a particular word of thanks to Mira. For those of you who saw the original flyer on this, we had asked Kathy Swan from the University of Kentucky to join us. She had a family medical emergency and was unable to, and Mira was kind enough to fill in for her on rather short notice. So thank you so much, Mira. The second person who will speak is Ross Weiner, and beautifully, these people are in the order succeeding in my left and in the order in which they will actually speak. Ross is Vice President of the Aspen Institute and Executive Director of its Education and Society program. In that role, he leads professional learning networks for urban school district leaders and senior congressional staffers. The program does a huge amount of work in a couple of major areas: strengthening human capital systems and supporting implementation of the Common Core state standards. I was saying to Ross when he came in that we love the Aspen tools and promoting them to our members and colleagues. Prior to his stint at Aspen, Ross was at the Education Trust, and also earlier in his career was a trial attorney in the Department of Justice. Our third speaker is my colleague, Leo Casey. Leo is Executive Director of the Albert Shanker Institute, and he is the architect of this conversation series that I have the pleasure of just facilitating today. Most recently, Leo was Vice President for Academic High Schools at the United Federation of Teachers in New York City. He was an amazing social studies teacher at Clara Barton High School in Brooklyn, where his classes, composed entirely of students of color and often immigrant and female, won the New York City championship in the We the People Civics competition for 10 years in a row, and a couple of times the national competition as well, and has teachers and teaching in his blood, since both his parents were teachers. And Randy Weingarten, our president, often refers to Leo as the person who taught her how to teach. Our last speaker for the day is Chester E. Finn Jr. Checker is a scholar, educator, and public servant who has been at the forefront, maybe one might even say in the crosshairs, of national education debate for 35 years. Including his time in the U.S. Department of Education. Checker has his doctorate from Harvard in education policy. He is now president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute and a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He is the author of 20 books and more than 400 articles appearing in a variety of well-known publications. We will get started with Mira in a moment, but I hope you will take a minute first to join me in welcoming this terrific panel.